Okay, so in this episode of Cloud with Chris, we're going to be talking all about cloud migrations. Now, when you think about migrations, a lot of people think about technology, but there's a whole other part to that as well. Have you ever heard about the Cloud Adoption Framework? Well, that's an aspect of what we'll be talking about today in this episode. Stay tuned for more. Hello there, welcome back to another episode of Cloud with Chris. You're with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. Now, thank you folks for joining. As we mentioned in the intro there, we are going to be talking about migrating to the cloud. So whether it's applications, whether it's other types of workloads, migrating to the cloud, a very broad concept, but we're fortunate that we have this thing from Microsoft called the Cloud Adoption Framework. So I'm sure that will be a feature of this episode, among with many different avenues that I'm sure we'll explore. So I'm very excited for this one, many different ways we can go. As always, if you like this type of content, please hit like, please hit the subscribe button, please hit the notification bell, no matter what platform you're listening on or watching on, whether it's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or of course, cloudwithchris.com. Please show your appreciation because then we can get great speakers back. And of course, great speakers. We have a brilliant, brilliant speaker today. I'm very, very pleased that we have Suzanne Tedrick joining us to talk about this excellent, excellent topic. So without further ado, let's go and meet Suzanne. Hey, Suzanne, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. Pleased to have you on the show. And interesting topic, right? Very broad topic, but we'll see where we end up. I think we were talking before going live. We'll see where those guardrails go and where we end up. It'll be fun, I'm sure.
Oh, with cloud migration, it's never a dull topic.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, very welcome. And I think quite an interesting background as well, right? So maybe start with some introductions first.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Suzanne Tedrick, and I am currently an Azure Infrastructure Specialist. So I concentrate mostly on infrastructure cloud services that are on the Azure platform. So anything dealing with virtual machines, networking services, cloud storage options. I'm likely the first person that you'll be talking to in the sale process at Microsoft. My clients are primarily in the major professional and college sports area. I'll keep my team affiliations to myself. But a lot of my conversations are about how does teams or leagues, how do they go about migrating applications and workloads to the cloud? I'm
Awesome.
also really proud to say that I am an author of the book Women of Color in Tech, which is a book that is meant to inform and inspire women of color to pursue tech careers.
Awesome. And not just an author, an award-winning author as well. We have to add that in, right? A award-winning author. So kudos and congratulations, and quite frankly, thank you as well for writing that book. We were talking just before going live about some of the topics I've had on the channel previously, like diversity and representation in technology, mental health, and quite frankly, for some of the things that we've seen over the last year, and obviously longer than that, but especially over the last year, to do with racial divides and Black Lives Matter and all these other aspects that we've seen, there's still a lot more to be done in the industry.
I completely agree. I think with the events of 2020, with the civil and social unrest that occurred in the United States and in other parts of the world, I think it really spotlighted that there is more work to be done in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in our particular industry, but in many other industries where there isn't a ton of diverse representation. That being said, I really applaud the work that is being done, the fact that we are now having those really difficult conversations and doing the difficult work so that we can, make sure that we are diversifying our ranks and that we're building the workforces that we want to see. I also emphasize to people that diversity, equity, inclusion are not just social justice
Yep.
conversations, but when we think about businesses and being innovative or being competitive, it is a source of strength having
Hmm.
diverse populations bringing diverse thought, diverse backgrounds, experiences to the table. And it really is a business imperative.
Absolutely. It's something which can really drive business, right? Because if you don't have those representation from diverse groups or diversity of thought or whatever angle or avenue you want to look at it from, there are many dimensions of diversity that you can look at, and it's important to get those different viewpoints. I think the canonical example I always think of is like headphones, for example, and they're typically designed for men, right? Because a lot of the basis that the design teams have been is men, and a lot of people they tested on is men. So when it comes to women trying on headphones, they don't quite fit right, and it's those types of things that can easily be solved for. So on all of us, I think, to go and do more on that. So again, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a team effort for all of us. And I love your analogy. It kind of illustrates the exact point that we're talking about. I often talk about artificial intelligence and how we're
Mm,
kind of using that to fast track a lot of the mundane tasks that we don't like doing. But when we're talking about uh, things that are regarding finances or housing or employment, the last thing that we want is developing products
yep,
that can marginalize
yep,
groups that have already been historically marginalized. So it kind of like re-emphasizes like we need to have more people at the table.
absolutely. I'm sure we could spin a whole session out on all those topics alone, which I think maybe we should.
Absolutely.
So let's let's move on from that one for now, but definitely we can revisit that. Migrating to the cloud, that's what we're talking about today. So broad topic. Where do we start, I suppose? Because we're fortunate we have this thing called the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. Is that a good basis to start at, maybe?
Absolutely. Obviously, working for Microsoft, I am a bit biased in terms of the framework. But I will say it's perhaps one of the most solid frameworks that one can have in terms of thinking about how they adopt cloud and migrate to the cloud. It's very holistic because it not only focuses on some of the technical considerations that a company needs to think about as they're making this monumental shift. But there's also business and cultural changes that do need to happen as well to kind of ensure that your migration is successful. One of the things that I thought was very interesting was that there was a 2020 study from the Cloud Security Alliance, and they were basically saying that 90% of their respondents said that they had a failed migration.
Wow.
And a lot of it was from things that can honestly be addressed from what's in the cloud adoption framework.
Wow, 90%. That is a big number. That is a
It
very big
is.
number. Wow. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that age-old statistic, I think it's ITIL and been used other places as well. The what is it? 80% people and process are typically the problem areas, and then 20% is actually the technology. So when you think about again those failed migrations, how much of them really are technical problems per se, or more about either education and skilling or process gaps where you're changing from that on-premises way of working and now moving into this cloud world. Again, a lot of that is addressed in this cloud adoption framework.
Absolutely. It provides a number of different tools and best practices that are actually based off of successes and,
Mm.
to some extent, lessons learned. And it's great not only for people who, may be working in an architectural capacity, but for, other IT professionals who are involved in the migration process and even business leaders when they have to, make sure that we're meeting key performance indicators, and that there is a return on the investment that they're making into the cloud.
Yeah, yeah, makes complete sense. So then, if we think about maybe I'm a brand new organization, not a brand new organization, but I'm an organization who's brand new to the cloud, and I'm thinking, okay, it's time for us to move. We're going to start our migration. Where do I start? I guess Cloud Adoption Framework is something I can use, but it's quite a big framework, isn't it? There's quite a lot to it.
Oh, for sure. You can have a complete podcast on that, to be quite honest. But I think that the most important thing I would say to any client is understanding what is your why. Why do you want to move to the cloud? And I think that's an important starting place because it helps to develop what the overall strategy is going to be, and therefore also kind of looking at areas that maybe where the reasoning and the rationale to move to cloud may not be fully developed. So a common reason why people tend to move to cloud is that they're trying to save costs on physical infrastructure, which is well and good, but without really kind of digging deeper and further understanding, well, what is the impetus behind this? Really getting into like the nitty gritty of, what's motivating you to do this, because, quite frankly, you might end up spending more money in cloud than you originally intended,
Yeah.
So, and so you got to ask those hard questions so that you can develop that strategy first and foremost.
Absolutely. It's almost digging below that first layer, isn't it? Of, okay, you've said that actually you want to go and get rid of that capital expenditure or whatever it is, as an example. But what does that actually mean? Like, why is that a big problem for you? Is it the fact that IT are perceived as this big expense that actually aren't giving a lot of value? Because that could ultimately be why you're getting rid of that capital expenditure, I guess, or something like that. So how do you then translate that into let's showcase IT being this innovator and how cloud can help you do that? And it's peeling away that onion, isn't it? Because there's maybe a multi-layered answer to it.
Exactly. And it's really important to understand those whys before you go into this process, because for some organizations, it may be a simple matter of, okay, we can just take what we have now and just put it on our cloud platform. So, rehosting, or what we call lift and shift. Or you find out that I've got a ton of legacy applications. I've got stuff that, probably is running on COBOL, like being funny.
Not uncommon. Not uncommon.
Now I just want to put it on cloud. And then it's like, okay, now we might need to completely, re-architect or rebuild what you're doing. So it's really important to just kind of, understand what is your why, and then taking that further, what exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish, and what is your ideal state when everything is said and done?
And something to maybe carry us forward to a little bit later, we can park it for a moment, but that why as well really drives not just that overall strategy, but then when you get to the individual workloads as well, some of those driving requirements. And that's something I'm a big fan of. Anyone listening in and has listened to a few episodes before will be going, here he goes again. But having those non-functional requirements and that understanding of, what is the target for that platform is super important, because if cost cutting is a concern, well, the way that you design high availability in a cloud environment may be slightly different to what you did on-prem, for example, because of different design considerations that will influence cost. And then it helps you kind of rank those priorities of, hey, is this really the critical application that we thought it was? Or actually, do we not need to really focus on that? And can we maybe save on the cost, which is the driving factor? So it helps from that solution level as well. But we can certainly come back to that one for sure.
Absolutely.
So then we've established our why. What's then that next step? Because I guess then it's almost like, okay, we know why we're going to the cloud. We understand the reasons that we want to go and do it. But now we've suddenly got this whole flood of work coming towards us, this overwhelming sense of dread of what's to come. So I guess number one is we're not alone, right, on that aspect.
To touch on that, I think what I would want my clients to understand is that, this is not a process that you can, that you have to go through alone. You have a wider team, both from a business and technical standpoint that can help you and wants you to be successful. And the other added thing is that we would hate for you to go down the rabbit hole that cloud migration, can take you down, and then you realize, oops, this is not where we wanted to go at all, and then you're part of that, those survey respondents that said I had a failed cloud migration. So I think it's really important to emphasize that, again, this is on top of having this framework, there are, resources and people that want to help you. I think the next important step, that we talk about is making sure that you have a thorough assessment of, your workloads and what is their current suitability for the cloud, and what kind of approach do we have to take in terms of either rehosting, refactoring, re-architecting, or whatever may have you. And I'd actually add something additional in that you do also need to think about the current skill set that you have in your organization to carry this out.
Yes.
Because for some people, they may have some knowledge and understanding of cloud, platforms, but when it comes to like the actual piece of migrating and identifying dependencies, making sure that there's compatibility from your on-prem to your cloud environment, making sure that you understand the nuances of the hybrid model, if you're going to continue to have on-prem in some way. All of that stuff is really, 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 really complex. And you need to feel confident that the people that you have, actually doing it, have the skills necessary to do it.
Yeah, 100%. I think the other thing that I see adding on to that one is that desire to go, right, okay, we're going to move to cloud. You don't necessarily need to change everything at once either. You can do that initial lift and shift, or you can decide to rehost some aspects and maybe modernize some and change tweaks here and there. But it's ultimately, as you say, building that real structured plan based on that assessment, isn't it? And not deciding, okay, we're going to rewrite all of the apps that we've got here because they're all legacy. They can't go to cloud. We're going to use this Kubernetes thing because I heard about this at this conference and it sounds really cool. It's not like using those kind of analogies, right? It's being really pragmatic around that plan and understanding based on those assessments, actually, these aspects could be lifted and shifted over, and we can maybe modernize them a bit later. These can actually go straight across into PaaS, and then we don't have to worry about managing them and maintaining anymore because the platform can deal with that for us. These bits maybe we want to modernize because actually we were going to think about modernizing them anyway, so let's focus development effort there. And these bits we don't need anymore. We can just end of life them because the business no longer needs it. So it's really being pragmatic around that plan, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. And just as a side note, as soon as you said Kubernetes, I flashback. I previously worked at IBM, and I worked specifically on Kubernetes. And anytime a client just said, we want Kubernetes, there was a part of me that just kind of went,
Yep.
a little bit.
Honestly, though, like whenever I engage in a discussion around Kubernetes, it is honestly my first question is, why do you feel you need to go down that path? Because there's always that trend in technology, right? We hear about these buzzwords and these trends, and it becomes, oh, we need to do that thing. And a lot of the time it makes sense for people, but it's making sure you've got the right reasons to go down that path, isn't it? I think is always the key to check.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think that's the important part about doing the assessment and doing what makes sense, because very often people will kind of come into the migration process with an already predetermined strategy, like we need to go to microservices, or we need to use Kubernetes or what have you. And then as you do the assessment and you think about future state, like, well, why do you need that?
Yeah,
And you're actually introducing complexity where you probably shouldn't when everything
exactly.
is said and done.
Exactly. And it's not done for bad reasons at all. I think as technologists we love to solve problems, don't we? You know, we've got a problem, right? Here's my solution, here we go. But sometimes actually taking that step back and going, you know what, we could do the same thing just by lifting and shifting. And then when we've got the time to focus on doing that Kubernetes thing, when we've got the skills and we've got the capabilities, then it's probably the right time. Maybe it's not right now, or maybe it is right now. But it's making sure you've got that clear judgment call rather than we're going to go this way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's the cool thing at the time, and you don't want to chase. This is not the place where you want to be chasing
Mm-mm.
fads or trends.
No.
Like you need to do what makes sense for the business
Yep.
at the end of the day. And you also hit on something that I think is really important, which is not boiling the ocean when it comes to your approach. I think that sometimes people, because of what's involved, they feel overwhelmed
Mm.
about it and feel like they have to move everything at once and do everything at once. And the truth is, if you start small, and identify those kind of smaller workloads that perhaps are already ideal for cloud, like that's low hanging fruit that you should definitely think about
Mm.
take it, to be perfectly honest. But just not thinking that you have to do everything right now. And in some cases, depending on the how large of a migration we're talking about, it would make sense for you to start in a very small area before committing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different strategies, right? That you can do it in waves. You don't have to necessarily take all of your small apps first or your big apps first or whatever it is. You can work out that strategy as it makes sense to you, again based on those assessments and all those plans that you put in place. But something that I want to pick up on what you said there was that idea of starting small and kind of growing over time. And we can absolutely think about that from an app perspective, but there's also that core infrastructure that sometimes people forget about, that landing zone, as we call it in the cloud adoption framework. This idea that there's core compute, core infrastructure that underpins all of those workloads, all of those applications. And I think this is something I'd love to have a bit of a chat on, because I've seen people come and ask me a little bit worried about, hold on, if I got to go and deploy this massive thing to start with before I even start my workloads and start deploying that. And there's different types of these landing zones. You can kind of grow them over time and evolve them to meet your needs. You don't need to have the everything at once scenario again there.
Absolutely. I mean, in some scenarios, you can,
Mm.
from a cost constraint or, a resource constraint. You just don't have enough skilled staff, or you don't have access to build in that skill to get that skilled staff. You just can't do it. And that's fine. It's better to start, in an iterative fashion, with things that that you can control versus going all in, knowing that you can't,
Yep.
and then having some disastrous outcomes later on.
Absolutely. I'm going to go a bit out of order of the typical CAF flow for a moment for something which I think is important before really thinking about that first migration. And that is to do with the governance side of things as well. Governance, I guess, maybe not a sexy topic for people in IT. We often hear it and think, oh, okay, we've got forms to fill in and processes to follow and all these things. But getting into the cloud where you've got this environment where I can go ahead and create a new virtual machine, I can go and connect my network to this place or do this thing because I've got that level of access potentially. It's important to have these governance principles in place ahead of time before you start migrating those workloads.
Thank you for saying that, and especially emphasizing the less than sexy part of it. I know that when people are having the conversations about cloud, it's about saving costs and innovation, like all the really, those sexy things. But you're right. You do have to put in not only those compliance guardrails well before you get started, But you have to have those conversations about security,
Yep.
making sure that you have those there, identity access management, all of the not so fun things you do have to have conversations with. And going back to the skills discussion, if again you don't have those people that are knowledgeable about that in your particular area, it would behoove you to kind of bring those subject matter experts in early and often, so that again you're not thinking about it after the fact. It's easier to correct the problem at the beginning stages than trying to correct it afterwards.
Yeah, because the thing again about cloud, right, is, and we know this, I'm sure listeners and viewers know this, but just to be really obvious about it, cloud is a consumption-based business. It's something you pay every month for those services, or you've got an agreement with a cloud provider or something like that, and you're consuming those services just like you would gas or electricity. It's now just a consumption model, and if you allow your users to go ahead and spin up what they want, when they want, however they want, because you haven't got those guardrails in place, that problem gets more challenging as time goes on, because more stuff is there. You can't quite figure out what stuff is genuinely needed, what stuff isn't. You haven't got that cataloging in place, and it can kind of spiral. So taking that time to almost pause and then go, right, now we'll start jumping into things and doing that migration. It's part of that planning, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah, I know that sometimes for certain conversations there is a hard deadline or some date that they're trying to meet. But to your point, what often happens is you'll see these charges and you're just kind of like, whoa, like who spent $90,000 running up virtual machines? Like, where are all these egress charges coming from? And then it's just like, and then when you sit down and you have the conversation, like, well, what are you doing from a governance standpoint? Like, who are your, what is the, are you engaging in least, privileges when it comes to setting up, some of the things in your particular subscriptions, or, like just really asking the questions. And then you kind of see that like moment where they're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, we don't really want to give everyone access to our production subscriptions so they can spin up their virtual machines for crypto mining or whatever it is. We don't want to allow that.
But I've unfortunately, I've had to have those conversations that, like it, for lack of a better word, it sucks, but these are the reasons why you talk about these things and you plan for these things now. And one of the things that the cloud adoption framework talks about is establishing a cloud center of excellence.
Yes.
To kind of, have a governing body so that, you can have these discussions about governance, you can have these discussions about, operations. And it's not just that you're doing things in a siloed way. Like you're making cloud decisions in a way that you understand what the impact is for other stakeholders that are in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that, again, it's just pausing, isn't it? Pausing to think of that plan, not just how your infrastructure will scale and the technical side will scale, but how you as a business operating will scale, because you're not going to have everyone with the skills to begin with. So to think about those waves of how you migrate over time and bring people along that journey, upskill people as you go, having that cloud center of excellence is a great way to almost have that central source to begin with, because it's not necessarily something that needs to be everlasting, and models can change and adapt. But so you've got that foundational knowledge base can then evolve and almost become like a virtual team or something like that,
right,
where it's part of those different project teams over time, and there's different models, etc. But it's just making sure not running before you can walk, I suppose, is the analogy, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be honest, we do offer cash reviews for clients. Like this is in addition to the documentation that's available on the Azure platform for clients, we do offer free CAP and WAF reviews. And it's funny, WAF being well architected framework reviews for anyone that isn't familiar. But the thing that always surprises me is sometimes there's a reluctance to take us up on that offer.
Mm-hmm.
And and realizing that people press for time, press for money. I'll totally understand and I totally get it. But it's worth having the review now, early in the process, so that you're not surprised later on. You're not caught with a gotcha or anything like that. And we really do want you to be successful, and we have your best interests at heart.
Exactly. And just, I think it's tangential to what we were just talking about there, but I've brought up on screen here the Microsoft assessments page, which I think there's a lot of focus on the Azure Well Architected review side of things. But there are some assessments as well, higher level, but still there for like the Cloud Journey Tracker. So understanding some of those motivations that we talked about earlier. The governance benchmark side of things as well. One for strategic migration assessment and readiness. So there are some of those tools out there to help from an end user perspective, just understand where are we right now? Where are we on that journey? And what are our blind spots almost? Where haven't we considered that actually we need to just focus on that for a little bit?
Oh, for sure. I love all of these because they're interactive, and it gets people thinking a little bit more deeply than perhaps when they first approached the process in the first place. It's funny, some of the interesting, when I walk through clients with some of these assessments, some of the feedback that we're getting, mostly positive, and like, I never thought about that. I'm like, that's exactly why we have it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I love about these questions as well, is they're very thought-provoking, like this one. What areas interest you? Estimate cost of operating in the cloud, deploying workloads to the cloud. They're those open-ended questions that, if you are really in that journey, it starts you thinking, oh, hold on, what about cost in the cloud? Like, how do I manage that? What do I do with that? What is that? And it then starts you thinking about, hold on, there is this different paradigm, this different way of operating and working, and all these different things that you need to consider. But I think this is one half of the story. The other thing I always like showing, and I'm big advocate of, is Microsoft Learn as well. And I think it's one of Microsoft's, in a way, best kept secrets. Like, I talk to people and they're always like, oh yeah, I've heard of Microsoft Learn, haven't quite used it. But it's just growing day by day, like the amount of content that is on there. I'm sure, no doubt, that there's going to be some form of cloud adoption framework content on here. I'll be honest, I can't say I've looked ahead of time, so this is going to be live as we're recording, which is always fun. Here we go. There we go. Cloud adoption framework already there.
There we go.
Exactly. But this is the thing, is there's so much content in Microsoft Learn. Thinking about those people who don't have those skills yet, whether it's more about this journey piece or whether it's technical skills for that migration or for the modernization or whatever it is, there's a greater wealth of information here too.
Oh, absolutely. And I should add that the resources are there for free for anyone that's on the platform. So free is always welcome. And if you're someone that is just, you just want to learn as much as you can and do it on your own time and schedule, the Learn resource has, for Azure and many other, parts of Microsoft product offerings, it's a fantastic resource to use, and I can't recommend it enough.
Perfect. So I guess at this point then, we've planned, we've assessed, we've decided on our strategy, we've planned and we've assessed, we've established our governance baselines ahead of time. This sounds like we're getting to a point where we can start thinking about migrations.
Yes. We're finally at a place where now, like, okay, now we can actually migrate. And I think that it stands to the point that, we spent so much time talking about the strategy and the planning and the resources and everything else. But I think it emphasizes the point that this is probably the most important part of the process. and that you want to get that down before you actually go through the migration process, be it with this environment or several other cloud environments. But knowing that you have that plan and strategy in place makes the actual migration far easier to do versus trying to figure all of that out on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
And then hits and misses, hits and misses, hits and misses. But the great thing about the migration process too is that there's also tools that can help you as you're going through it as well. So again, it's not as if you're just doing it alone and that you don't have some tools or guidance to help you in that effect.
Yeah, I think when you get to that stage, the actual migration, there's some great tooling within Azure Migrate, for example, where you can go and I guess we talked about assessments from more of the broader context a bit earlier in understanding the types of workloads. But at this point, Azure Migrate can even help you assess, okay, the readiness of that workload and what it would map to from an Azure perspective, and understanding some of those capabilities as well. What if you want to do a lift and shift, for example, what do you need to do to bring it into Azure? What SKUs do you need to choose? What types of disks do you need to choose? I think there's even now integrations in there for migrating to app service, for example, and some other pieces as well. Like there's some great functionality happening in Azure Migrate as really that suite and that framework is maybe the wrong word, but that holistic tool, not just to think about lift and shift, but really that migration story more broadly. It's really awesome.
Oh, it's fantastic. And you hit on the keyword that I always tend to emphasize on when it comes to a migration, a holistic approach. Meaning you're thinking not just about the latest, the greatest of features and benefits. You are thinking about how it impacts everything and everyone, from cost to optimization to innovation, like whatever it may be. You're thinking about it from a deep level versus I just need it to run on Azure.
Yeah, but that's a super point, right? I think any project, for it to be a success, we need some of those basic project fundamentals in. Like one that really stands out to me, for example, is stakeholder management. Where it gets really complex and maybe a bit grey sometimes is in these larger organizations where you've got the IT team that kind of operate the applications right now on premises, but you've got a different business owner elsewhere who cares about that thing being up and running, etc. You've got a support contract with a partner somewhere else, and you've got the support team and all these different players. It's important to have that almost symphony of different people working together. You've got your conductor in the middle and everyone on the same page, understanding their roles in that migration and what their roles are when they get on the other side as well. Really, really key.
Oh, for sure. I was just thinking about a past client before I came to Microsoft, where my team and I were actually brought in after the fact. So they had already not only used the Azure platform, but they were using several other cloud providers in kind of a multi-cloud strategy. But not really thinking about what adoption looks like for their organization, not thinking about governance, thinking about who has access to what, or like it was just for lack of a better word, a mess. And we almost had to kind of take the approach of we need all of you to come together, and so that we can collectively move forward. Because if we keep operating from, as you said, from a stakeholder standpoint, where everyone's just kind of concentrating on their own agenda without thinking about the deeper impacts to the business, then it's not really a cloud strategy then.
Oh, exactly. What are the analogies or the sayings we can throw in here? Failing to plan, planning to fail. It takes a village. I'm sure there's many more. If you've got any more, put them in the comments because we'd love to read through them and hear them all. But it's true, isn't it? It does really take that coordination, that effort to do that. But more importantly, like you rightly said earlier, it does not need to be all done at once. And it doesn't need to be this big, scary beast.
It doesn't. I mean, I know that we've kind of said all of these things like plan, assess, and do this, do that. Like, it's always throwing a lot at people. And especially when you look through the entirety of the cloud adoption framework, it may seem like it's a ton of things coming at you at once. But honestly, it's really about just giving you guidance on the best path forward for you, and just taking, slow steps, towards progress, whatever that may look like for you, versus, we're just going to tell you do everything at once and hope for the best.
Exactly.
And to reemphasize that the framework, again, is based on the fact that, we've had a lot of experience doing this. We've done so many different types of migrations, big, small, some of them that we've had successful, and others we've learned a lot more than we probably expected. So the framework isn't something that was just kind of, created in a vacuum, without that initial feedback or, what have you. It really is the best possible practices from what we've seen from our experience.
No, agreed. I think it's a great resource that's available there, and absolutely, if you weren't aware of Cloud Adoption Framework already, you're listening in or watching the video, take that time just to have a scan through. Again, not expecting you to take every single detail in, but it can certainly turn on a few light bulbs, maybe give a few light bulb moments of things you may have forgotten or not considered. So excellent. So, Suzanne, any kind of closing thoughts or final words of wisdom that you wanted to give folks who are tuned into the episode here?
I think it goes back to what I said originally at the start, which is you don't have to go it alone with cloud migration. So we drove home the fact that we believe that the cloud adoption framework is a great resource. But there are many other folks that want to be there to help you be successful, and so highly encouraged, just remembering that you're not in this alone, and to reach out to your resources when often.
Absolutely. Excellent, and a nice way for us to wrap that up. None of us are alone. We have absolutely got those folks there we can rely on and be there with us through those tough times, whether that is cloud migrations or something else. We'll leave it there and leave it as a motivational, uplifting ending to the episode there. So, Suzanne, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate the discussion. Been a great one. And we'll definitely need to get you on, I think, to talk about your book and some of those other topics we hinted at a bit earlier in the session as well.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's been a sincere pleasure.
Thank you. So there we go, folks. We have been talking all about cloud migrations. I think we did well to talk, for about 30 minutes plus without mentioning migrations or talking about the migrations. Mostly talking about strategy, planning, governance, etc. But as you can imagine, it's quite a shift. It's a journey that you're going to be on, and it's important, as we said earlier, failing to plan, planning to fail. Get those foundations in right, and the rest should follow on nicely and on a more smoother path. So the Cloud Adoption Framework is absolutely there. Go check that out. Microsoft Learn, Microsoft Assessment as well. These are all great tools that you can go ahead and use either at the beginning of your journey or throughout your journey at any point as well. So we'll put some links into the show notes for those as well. And with that, folks, you know the deal. If you've liked this content, please hit the like button, please subscribe, please hit the notification bell, whether that's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or cloudwithchris.com as well. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and until the next one, thank you for tuning in, and bye for now.